Hello and welcome to another edition of No Nonsense with Pamela Wallen. Well, I feel like we're living in a bit of a flood the zone time of year. We see this stateside where the president makes an announcement every 5 minutes, and it feels like the same thing is happening in Canada. Some of them for real, some of them to distract from others. We've got a so-called pipeline deal, but we don't know whether it's going to exist because the prime minister may decide that BC has a veto over this issue. We've got a shift in strategy on defense and perhaps a change of heart over which plane we will buy. And then, of course, there's Ukraine and a possible ceasefire and the cost of cozying up to China. Don't even know where to start, but I know who will know. Our really, really smart pod panel. It seems like ages since we've talked. So these folks have been around for a while. They know what they're talking about. So let's get some thoughts from Mark Norman, the former head of the Navy, a Vice Admiral, and 40 years of service to this country. Tasha Kheiriddin, outspoken political columnist and lawyer and a whole bunch of other things. And Margaret McCuaig-Johnston, a respected academic, to take a look at global shifts that are going on. Welcome to you all. How have you been?
Overwhelmed, Pamela. Overwhelmed.
I just have an urge to say, but who cares, Tasha?
Well, actually, but that's what Carney said. Who cares?
Exactly.
It's the phrase of the week.
It's the phrase of the week. And he did try to walk it back because whether we like Donald Trump or not, we do have to care about that relationship.
Yeah, we do. I think that quip sort of, it sums up a way a lot of people are feeling, but it shouldn't be something that falls from the prime minister's lips. And he did walk it back. He did apologize, but he's apologizing a lot to Donald Trump lately. It's not good.
Yeah, I want to get into that. But honestly, Tasha, just a word on this, because it's not the first time we've seen this. The week before it was pipelines are boring. There seems to be a response. I don't know, the prime minister seems to bristle when he gets questions that he doesn't think he should have to answer. And this is a problem.
It's funny because that's something we associate with Donald Trump, right?
Yeah.
Donald Trump's the one who takes reporters to task and, calls them piggies and other crazy things.
And stupid.
Yeah. And so for Carney gets testy. He gets testy, and I've noticed he gets testy. He gets testy in a couple circumstances. One, when it's something he feels it's a foolish question, or it's maybe beneath him a little bit, not the smartest question in the room. Two, it gets testy with women reporters. I've seen this more than once. It seems to be a woman asking the question. And I think three, it's also maybe a function of he's not used to this job, even though he's been doing it now for about 6 months. Yeah. When you're a CEO, people don't ask you questions like that. You're not used to the media intensity.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Margaret. And it does keep bringing back that issue, which is, yes, Mark Carney has lots of experience as, a global climate guru and governors of banks, but that doesn't make you a politician and somebody who understands the touch that is needed.
That's right. And he's really got to get these flippant responses under control. He's not a politician, really, we're seeing.
Yeah.
And so it's taking him some time to learn how to give responses that are honest and straightforward, and not just move quickly to a flippant answer. Yeah. And I don't think we've ever seen him give a misleading answer. He's always said that he would be straightforward with Canadians, but he has to just drop that kind of flippant instinct.
Yeah,
when he hears something he doesn't want to hear.
Yeah. And we will get into some other things about, because we've heard testimony this week on the whole conflict of interest question, but we might come back to that because I do want to get to Mark and say hello and see what you think about whether or not we should keep the F-35. I know you're a Navy guy, but I know you have views on this. What we have seen happen on the front, the Swedish king and queen came to town in a massive lobbying effort using that vulnerability of the state of the relationship with the US to say maybe you should consider another option than the F-35. Lots of people saying, whoa up. We've invested billions of dollars and a lot of jobs are at stake. What's your take?
Yeah, so it's a fascinating topic. Sadly, this has been over politicized and emotive debate now for literally the better part of 15 years.
Yep.
I would love, and I wrote a column in the Financial Post this week actually on this very subject. So if your listeners are interested, they can go and check that out. But fundamentally, if we'd had our act together, we wouldn't be having this conversation. We'd be talking about something else,
right?
In the broader context of the challenges we're facing, but it wouldn't be such an iconic representation of the problems we're facing. Let's not oversubscribe the Swedish engagement as it relates to the aircraft itself. And what I would say is there are many more opportunities with Sweden than just the Gripens. Okay, this is an extremely advanced economy, an extremely advanced defense industrial sector. They are incredible purveyors and developers of advanced military technologies. And so there are lots of things that we could be doing with Sweden beyond just the fighter issue. I don't dismiss the significance of the fighter issue, but I want your listeners to understand that, there's potentially more to it. There are some airborne surveillance aircraft that we desperately need the Swedish technology is now becoming increasingly in demand in Europe because people are walking away from American suppliers for the same reason that we're having these conversations. So my short message is, I am glad we're having this conversation because it's forcing us to ask ourselves difficult and uncomfortable questions that we wouldn't otherwise ask ourselves.
Yeah. Well,
I'm not advocating that we ditch the airplane.
Right.
And in fact, my column suggests that there is undeniable technical advantage to the F-35 over the Gripen, but the Gripen in and of itself is an incredible aircraft that could serve Canada well. I believe that the solution for this is to get both, but to get both in significant enough numbers that we're not trying to shave the ice cube. And that has been the essence of the problem. We have presented this as a binary choice, and therefore everybody who has a view piles on. I believe the Gripen could be serving our interests in Latvia and in Eastern Europe very effectively. They could also support some of our domestic requirements. And the F-35 could and should be the technological solution that bridges us to the next generation and allows us to engage more advanced threats, either in a North American context or, God help us, if we have to forward deploy into Asia Pacific. That is the only airplane that has any chance of coming home safely. So that's my short answer.
The other issue it raises, obviously, Mark, and this is, one we also have to wrestle with is, should we even be buying manned aircraft at this point with all the emphasis on drones and new technology?
So let me address that very quickly. I don't want to monopolize this, but there's two issues there. First of all, I go back to what I said a minute ago. If we can only have this conversation in 2025 because we are so woefully incompetent when it comes to procurement that we haven't bought an airplane that we should have bought 10 years ago. So that conversation is a legitimate conversation, but we're not there yet, okay? And this is being weaponized as an argument against manned fighters. There is still a role for manned fighters. Oh, and by the way, the bridge to unmanned fighters is through technologically advanced manned fighters. So there will be a phase of complementary and cooperative air-to-air, air-to-surface, whatever technology you want to apply, where the drones and the airplanes are working together. Oh, and by the way, the flying classified cloud server known as the F-35 is the best platform to bridge us to that technology.
Yeah, okay, but let me put this in the larger context to Margaret for a moment, because Mark referenced this in his comments. Of course, the only reason, well, we're talking to the Swedes because we should have made a decision earlier. That's a given. But because foreign policy has changed so radically since Donald Trump was elected, also really since Mark Carney came to office, because he has a very different perspective. He comes from living for 20 years in Europe and participating in that, seeing himself and this country from a European perspective. So we see a change in the relationship with India, change in the relationship with China, all kind of under the rubric of we must not be dependent on the US. I see that all. I don't want to throw the baby out with the bath. This is still our biggest neighbor, our largest trading partner, and probably always will be. So where are you seeing that balance?
Well, I think the Prime Minister is absolutely right to be laser focused on trade diversification. And he's really been doing that all over the Asia Pacific, that trip he took recently, and the UAE, Saudi Arabia, South Africa, umpteen European countries. We've got new trade agreements with almost anybody on the planet, it seems. That doesn't mean the trade is flowing at that level yet, but I think he has been right to focus on that, because to the extent that we're losing U.S. trade, we need to replace it. Having said that, those markets aren't really the markets that will replace our steel, aluminum, and autos, which is what are really vulnerable now with the U.S. And so we need to look at, reinforcement. We're going to have an announcement on steel, aluminum, and
aid for the industry.
Yeah, to support them. But the other thing that we need to be really concerned about in trade diversification is the fact that when he is so focused on that, he seems to be leaving the issue of human rights, values, and principles at the door. And there's been no mention by the Prime Minister when this has been raised that he has raised those issues with those countries. And here's his book on values. I think it's soon to be remaindered, because yes. Where are the values? We don't see them in his agenda. And indeed, we see big risks with China's coercive behavior, that if he responds to that coercion, we will have ourselves a much more serious problem in the future.
This is kind of the issue I'm getting at, is that this has become an excuse reason, and I put a slash between those two words, for a lot of things. As you point out, Margaret, that, just let's get trade deals done with everybody in the world to, counteract what's going on with the US. But a lot of it seems like activity for activity's sake. This whole pipeline agreement, which seemed radical and amazing on day one, we're now listening to the Prime Minister explain this. Well, it's really not a deal. It's just, it's the beginning of another process. And I'll just go to Tasha on this. Are we seeing a lot of activity for activity's sake, and are we seeing our troubled relationship with the U.S., not helped by saying who cares, as a reason to just do things differently and without much substance underneath them, just this activity and announcement?
Well, the Carney government's response to the U.S. threat to Canada's economic well-being has been on a couple of levels. One is its increased spending. That is something that we saw in the budget. That's been the primary response. It's been a huge outlay of money on capital projects, these so-called national projects, including the pipeline you mentioned, the idea that we're going to generate economic activity. And for those sectors Margaret mentioned, steel, softwood lumber, anything used in construction, anything that, or even workers who would be idle otherwise, who might have skills that could be deployed elsewhere. So that's the first piece. The second piece is this flurry of activity, like you said, running around the world to get diversification and trade deals with other countries. And to do that, you unfortunately, the more you say, the less you may get. So, we saw the most recent example of that on human rights with the Carney's repudiation of the feminist foreign policy that we had under Justin Trudeau. Now, I'm not a fan of that feminist foreign policy. I read it. It makes everything is feminist. Climate's feminist, all economic activity.
Performative art. Yeah.
It was a performative art as well. But the point is that, yes, it by just jettisoning it in that sort of way, Carney is making a statement that, those things, any human rights questions are secondary. And going to China, his cozying up to China, or his idea that we will increase trade with China, let's put it that way. Also, if he goes and we know what happened when you raise human rights issues with China, they don't talk to you anymore, right? So is he going to make that choice? So it's less activity for activity's sake. It's activity in ways that change fundamentally the relationship of government to industry in Canada and to the taxpayer ultimately in Canada on the spending side, and also internationally change Canada's position as a country that does stand up for human rights and other things, but instead now we'll be putting commerce first. So that's what I see as the changes here, and that's what Carney's agenda has been. And the irony of the book, Margaret, is good to raise, because previously he was Mr. Climate, activist and all this stuff, and that seems to just be quietly dissipating into the background.
This is the other question in your area too, Mark, which is some comments this week from the government, from the Prime Minister, saying we're going to try and meet that NATO commitment, but it's going to take some shoehorning in the budget and moving the home of the Coast Guard, but all sorts of bunch of little things to try and meet the number, which is not the point, really, of this. We should be meeting our commitment in a way that's real, so that we can show up in places and do our bit. Are you seeing that in your world too, this activity for the sake of it, announcements the next day you look at it and go, less there than meets the eye?
Well, yeah, but not in a cynical way. And so, there's real challenges here. And this is classic political announcement methodology, I'm agnostic from a political perspective. The hard work really starts after the announcement.
Right.
I mean, those working in the offices of ministers and prime ministers will argue that the writing the media release is really tough. Well, yeah, okay, it is. However, actually delivering what it is that's being announced is where the hard work has to happen. And so, there are a couple of challenges here. One is, where is the money coming from? And we've talked about this before. Nobody is arguing amongst us anyway that the commitment is long overdue, and that we should be in lockstep with our key allies. Okay, fine. This is a lot of money, and then that comes to the practicality of actually delivering the money in a responsible fashion, and we're already seeing that play out. The irony that the solution in defense to move more money is to hire more people to move more money, to me, just speaks to how messed up we truly are. From a process and programmatic perspective.
So like have a new bureaucracy to acquire military equipment.
I'm all in on the Defense Investment Agency decision. I think that is long overdue, and it's going to take a while for it to bear fruit. But my point is, we already have 120,000 more public servants than we had only just a few years ago. The last thing we need to do is to hire more of them or shuffle them around. But but that's a conversation for another day. So yeah, these challenges are real, and the hard work is actually in the how, not in the what.
This is the issue, the process, and if we go back to a Trudeau era phrase, the deliverology. Like there's lots of big promises here, but you actually have to get some meat on the bone. So Margaret, you kind of referenced that with a lot of these deals, running here, running there, signing agreements to have an agreement to talk about an agreement a little bit later on. So, I mean, you have to start somewhere. I get that, but what is your concern on that front, that there's not enough substance in the front end, or maybe concern the other way with a deal with India and making up, kissing and making up?
Yeah, and I think, when you do have these trade agreements and trade negotiations, you can also deepen the security dialogue. And so one of the things that I think has to be emphasized, and my understanding is at the officials level, it's happening with both China and India, that transnational repression in Canada is not on. We've just had a big commission on that, a big study by Commissioner Hogg on that. And a lot of information came out. And this has got to be part of a discussion about, if we want trade with Canada, then stay out of our country in terms of this
foreign interference in elections. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think, there is potential for that, but I'd like to see the government talking about that more publicly, not just understanding that those kinds of discussions are happening under the radar. Xi Jinping has to be told directly that that's not on, and Modi as well.
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, there are huge, big issues there, and we are playing a role in it, whether we, are doing it deliberately or because we're kind of in reactive mode to what's going on in the US. But when we go to countries and recognize their behavior or lack of it, good behavior, we're influencing the decisions that others make.
Right. And the trade discussions with UAE and Saudi Arabia are, to me, really concerning, because it seems that Jamal Khashoggi has just been forgotten.
Mm-hmm.
What happened to him was horrific. And I don't think we can let them forget that this is a big black blot on their national reputation. Personally, I was approached by prominent Middle Eastern media to be a contributor, and a regular contributor. And I just said, no, you didn't stand up for Jamal Khashoggi when he died. And I'm not going to be any part of your organization. So, those kinds of messages are important for reputation. And it's a disincentive when these things are raised publicly for the countries to do it in the future. And we have to keep reminding them that this kind of behavior is not acceptable in the international community, and not just say this is unacceptable. Canadian ministers keep saying this is unacceptable, that is unacceptable, mm-hmm. and then they don't do anything as a consequence.
And then jump on a plane. Yeah,
exactly.
One of the other issues that came up, Tasha, in the wake of the meeting in the UAE is that the Prime Minister had followed his former colleagues at Brookfield very quickly into that area. And Brookfield does seem to be, because they're in so many businesses, I think they own 2,000 businesses in one way. Every time there's a government announcement, there seems to be some connection and some benefit for Brookfield. So that's kind of the flip side of this, the domestic concern about all of this activity around the world.
Yeah, well, I mean, as you said, Brookfield is a huge organization, right? And so they will have interests everywhere. And can you build walls between the prime minister's interests and the company's interests? And when he's out there lobbying for a deal that could benefit the company, but it won't benefit him anymore. I mean, his interests are in a
In the long
trust.
run, maybe, yes.
Yeah, but in the long run, perhaps. But it's more seen as, your friends are getting a preferential treatment of some kind. It's hard to avoid with an organization as big as that. And I think Carney has to do everything he can to avoid that impression. But unfortunately, we're also in an era now. I mean, look at how Donald Trump blurs the lines between personal gain and interest and all his swanning around in the Middle East. I mean, he does crypto deals that will benefit the Trump family, Trump Corporation. Gets a gift of a plane from Qatar that, I mean, what was that? Like, it's, all these things, it's a blurring of lines between personal and private, personal and public interest and private interest. And I think that unfortunately he's setting a tone there. I think the world is shifting away from, sadly, linking human rights to trade, having this idea of separation and of moral ethics for politicians, because unfortunately we're seeing the free world leader, Donald Trump, blurring those lines himself. The United States used to stand for that shining city on the hill, and we're going to, change the world through trade. China's going to be democratized, and all these happy slogans of the 1980s that we all remember because we're old here. And it's all gone. It's gone. The New World Order is very different. It's transactional. It blurs the lines of public and private interest, and it's I fear actually where this is heading, because it puts human rights as a secondary consideration. And it puts, it exempts people from the kind of scrutiny. And I would not equate Mark Carney with Donald Trump on the personal gain piece at all. But it gives license. Trump is giving license to people all over the world to do the same thing that he is doing.
Mark, let's step back a bit, because I think this is an interesting question. We did business with the Americans for many, many years because it was a clean, safe, predictable neighbor. We know each other. We're cousins. We cross the border. We feel comfort. Now that we're out in the real world, as Tasha says, in a much more transactional frame of mind, in part because we have to be, but in part because obviously we choose to be. Where are the red flags for you in all of this?
Yeah, and it's interesting. And the other, I would say that there was a simplicity and an ease with which we could do that business that you refer to. And I would add that in the current context, the unease that is being politicized, and it's legitimate, is in some respects, if not a direct question of values, it's values adjacent, if I can use that. Like fundamentally the transactional and entirely objective nature of the relationship, notwithstanding the tariff implications, really hasn't changed. So now it's a question of, we don't really want to do business the way we have for a variety of reasons that are predominantly, if I can be so complicated, icky.
That's a technical term. I'm pretty sure, Mark. I think it's a technical term.
I apologize for the overly sophisticated language, but that's kind of where we are. So back to your question. Look, part of the problem from a defense perspective here is the issue of independence. And this is a very material issue. This is not an issue of perceived ickiness. This is actually a problem, and it permeates a number of key issues with respect to intellectual property, access, and the capacity to get into the core coding of complicated systems. Who decides what features or capabilities are or are not going to be accessible? Who decides that updates to the software that control all of these complex systems is is going to be pursued or not. I mean, in simple terms, we want to add an app to the computer software that we're using in our new destroyers.
Right.
And the US says, well, we don't like that app, or we don't agree with that app, and we won't allow you to add it. Well, now we've lost a degree of sovereign control over our own capability. And so these are some of the actual material challenges that we're trying to face, notwithstanding the macroeconomics of this and notwithstanding the icky component, as I described it earlier. There's some actual real issues here. And this is part of the debate over F-35.
Yeah, I was just going to say, people are saying, oh, we can't risk just having the F-35s because we don't know what Donald Trump will do. Maybe he'll just pull the plug on the technology and we won't be able to update it. But probably China could do that any day of the week to us because they've been stealing IP from everybody.
Correct. And where they can deny, I mean, they could do it through a cyber attack of some. If we assume that we don't have 100%, protection, which we don't in a lot of these systems. So, yeah, these are legit, which goes back to my opening comment about I am pleased that we're having this conversation. Right. I am immensely frustrated that we've put ourselves in a situation where we can have these conversations. But at least we're having the right conversations. Yeah. And but the issue is going to be there is no easy solution to this. There is no political win to this for either government or opposition. No matter what government decides, they're going to be cheered from some corners and lambasted from others. And maybe that's the perfect political scenario. But I think the risk we're avoiding is critical risks of criticism rather than the material or operational risks. And that applies to all the stuff, not just airplanes, which are what everybody's focused on.
No, exactly. I mean, Margaret, that's kind of the point, that we have put ourselves in this position. If we hadn't been so dependent on the US, we wouldn't be so concerned about what Donald Trump says every day. I mean, honestly, I think we're slowly getting to the place where people are just going, oh, that's Trump, and not reacting quite in the same way. But the vulnerabilities that...
You mean like the Prime Minister did?
Yeah.
Sure. Yes. Yeah.
No, well, that's the trouble. We're, going from elbows up to who cares, and, kind of the way we've caught ourselves in a trap that we may have set for ourselves just by our own dependence on one partner. But if we've put ourselves in this position that we have to go out now into the world, we've also restricted our ability to be wagging our fingers at a lot of countries for their behavior at home, because we may need them, and so we don't have a lot of flexibility. Like, again, hoist on our own petard here.
Well, I think that's why the Prime Minister is right to be having all these conversations. And yes, it seems like he's always on planes, and the guy's got more energy than anybody I've ever seen to be keeping up that kind of agenda. But we need to diversify across the board, and we need to have as many friends as we can, especially if we're losing our best friend in the United States. And just on the defense front, I'd just like to add to what Mark's been saying, that we also need to be really ramping up attracting and retaining and training our military. We need a lot more pilots to be flying all these planes we're going to buy. We don't have them right now. We need to be attracting them. We also need this idea of having a volunteer, massive volunteer.
Thousands of civil servants who are going to be laid off, and we're going to train them.
Who are going to be fighting fires. No, you hire firefighters to fight fires.
Right.
Not some admin person from Ottawa, for God's sake. That's really a scary thought. We need to be paying people at
properly.
a decent level. I'm completely supportive of the increase in military pay. And we need to be training them. We need to train them in Arctic conditions. That's another big area that we need to enhance. So, that's laying the groundwork in Canada for what we need to defend our country in whatever's going to come from abroad. The idea that the F-35 software has to be updated somewhere in the States is a concern. And then we need to be enhancing trade even with China.
So regardless of the cost, we heard Michael Kovrig over the last 2 weeks saying, be careful where you walk and what deal you do with China. If you think dealing with Donald Trump has problems, wait till you start dealing with Xi.
Well, that's right. And not no matter what the cost. Michael is right that we need to tread carefully. We need to look at the medium and long-term implications of our actions with China. What China's now doing with its coercive behavior on canola is similar to their coercive behavior on canola with Meng Wanzhou, and their coercive behavior when Kevin and Julia Garrett were being held.
Yeah.
So again, canola was a target there. The canola farmers need to diversify their trade. That should be a priority for the Canadian government.
They are trying, but it's
they
hard.
are trying.
The problem is the same as pipelines and those issues, which is you need to be able to get your product to market. Right. And so you can trade with a bunch of other people if you have a way to get it to other people. The whole thing about going across the 49th is it was easy. And I want to come back. I'm going to come to you on that, Tasha, but I have to give Mark 10 seconds or 20 to say that you're very thrilled about people from CRA coming to help the military out.
Well, yeah.
Serve in Latvia.
Look, I mean, they're probably fantastic people, and that's not the point. What disturbed me about this whole thing is it is just an indication of how desperate we have become.
Yeah.
I guess the good news is we recognized that we have a serious problem.
Yeah. No, that's it. Naming it at least means we have to deal with it. So, Tasha, let me come back to you on this issue, because we're back again in the same place we've been for a very long time on pipelines and diversification and getting not only oil and gas, but whether it's potash or whether it's uranium or all of the critical minerals, everything that we can do to generate that cash that Mark was talking about, that we're all going to need a big whack of money in this country to do everything we're talking about needing to do. And we are just stymied on the ability to get through BC or Quebec or whatever it may be, to get our products of all shapes and sizes to Tidewater so that we can sell to people and make some money to pay our bills. Like, it seems so basic.
Well, it is basic on its face. We've avoided it because we could send them by truck or train south of the border, right? So you didn't need to do the Tidewater bit. And Carney is developing 2 ports, one in Quebec and one LNG port in BC. He's also talking about a port, I think, in Manitoba. So the idea is, we got to improve that infrastructure so that we can get things onto ships and get them to the rest of the world. But I think that the big question for the pipeline of BC, that issue is the national unity piece that is missing here. Carney talks about one Canadian economy, and all the premiers signed on to the idea of one Canadian economy, dropping trade barriers. What promptly happened? 2 things. Doug Ford brought in to Buy Ontario procurement policy. Buy Ontario. Okay, not buy Canadian, buy Ontario. Bizarre. Did a big announcement. We're going to buy Ontario stuff. That flies right in the face of that idea. And then second, of course, you have David Eby saying, not over my dead body. Are you going to change the tanker moratorium? And are you going to build a pipeline here? And then Carney saying, well, BC's got, implying they have to accept this, but
essentially he gave them a veto in his words. He may change that again, but
yes, and the Indigenous groups and communities in BC also who, there's a lot of LNG deals that are dependent on their support in BC right now. If the pipeline situation, if it inflames them and they say no, we don't want it, it could jeopardize. That's the argument anyway. They jeopardize those deals as well that are already there. So then even less stuff will get to Tidewater. So I think the bottom line here is that the Prime Minister has to herd the cats. He has to convince people to be with the national program. And the way to do that is incentives. I don't know. I mean, maybe this is EB's negotiating position, that he's taking this as a basic position and saying no, because he wants something else. And that's where the government can give him something, whether it's financial, compensation or residuals from the transportation of crude oil, or any kind of other deals the federal government want. I mean, EB's in the catbird seat. He should negotiate, get something for his province, as opposed to stand in the way of a national project. That should be the approach.
The other thing, Tasha, is that we have a federal government to mediate these disputes.
Right.
If Alberta says yes and BC says no, it's the job of a federal government to come in and say, this is in the national interest, so this is how it's going to work.
Correct. But you also,
Sorry. No, so yes, we have. However, we have empowered everybody else not just to think no and to say no, but to actually act in their individual interests. And sorry, Tasha, I just, this is part of the problem. The mechanisms that we have created over decades of behavior are reinforcing the very negative things that Tasha is correctly identifying. And so how do we flip the conversation so that it's incentivizing the behavior? Look, if we're in a burning house, which arguably we are, and people are in their individual bedrooms saying, well, I don't smell smoke, I'm more interested in my own issue right now, then, not to trivialize this is the kind of behavior that we're seeing. And yes, Doug Ford, that's a great example. That's nationally irresponsible, putting macro national interests aside in more parochial interests. But this is fundamentally how we have behaved. And so, yes, I agree that this is the role of the federal government, but equally, the mechanisms by which they do this have been eroded significantly over time.
I agree, but premiers are there to defend their own interests, and somebody has to be, resolving those. We need our own dispute settlement mechanism.
That's what I was going to say. I mean, McDonald said it best. It's like herding cats when he got Confederation, herding all these people. And Carney is not a herder. Carney is the CEO technocrat, like we said, who gets testy at press conferences. He has his vision, and there you go. The problem here is not just the provinces, it's also Indigenous communities. And we just had a big court decision in BC, in Richmond, which found that the Cowichan Band has rights to fee simple land in Richmond. Hundreds of property owners, small property owners, but also the city, larger ones, industrial ones are affected by this. They can't
sell their homes because
this is being appealed, but that takes a long time. And we have kicked the ball on Indigenous rights into the courts for decades, to Mark's point. And that has been a huge mistake, because that has then created this scaffolding also of litigation and competing decisions that then the federal government has to respect, or the provincial government. I mean, even other Indigenous communities are mad at the Cowichan. The Musqueam are saying, well, wait, it's not just you, it's ours too. But the problem is that this is has a very large impact on resource development, huge impact on resource development. So the federal government isn't just negotiating or trying to get all the provinces on side. This is the real sticking point, is the Indigenous communities that now, that the pathways now go to the courts, and that takes forever. So that's where I think Carney has to get in there, and they have to find a break for this logjam. And the only thing, like I said, that I think is it's not sticks necessarily, because sticks leads to what we had with the wet's a wet and blocking the train
get
tax.
Some carrots out.
It's carrots, man. Get them some figure out what will make people agree to this deal and make it happen.
Just
Margaret, go ahead.
Another perspective on this, and I agree that the Indigenous communities are a big factor in this decision. Bigger, I would say, than Premier Eby. Premier Moe was part of these discussions. I found that very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And if you think about it, putting a pipeline across Saskatchewan through Manitoba to the Port of Churchill might be a lot easier than taking it through the Rockies and over the dead body of Premier Eby and all the Indigenous people in the northern BC communities. It might be a lot faster to just do it east from Alberta.
Yeah, there's a lot of complications with that.
Yeah.
And in fact, what we see happening is even the producers of product like Nutrien, they're just, they're putting money into shipping terminals out of the US because they don't want to fight going east and they don't want to fight going west, and they can still go south, so they will.
And going north is hard too. I mean, Churchill is a northern port, and that is in itself. Yes, the north is getting less icy by the year, but it's still much more challenging. It adds
There's
cost.
Still a lot of winter out there.
Yeah, it adds cost of shipping and time.
Can we just do a final round, because we really don't know where things stand with the situation in Ukraine? President Trump has moved his deadline. It was supposed to be this week, but he says there's going to be, the deadline is when they resolve it all. I know I sound like a broken record, but honestly, had the West and NATO responded in 2014 when Putin went into Crimea, if we had been acting like a grown-up NATO group, maybe we could have put a few brakes on this now. I don't see a good outcome, Margaret, do you?
We have yet to see the detail in the deal that's been worked on by the US and Ukraine. I'm hopeful that will come up with something. Frankly, 27 of the 28 points in the 28-point plan that was devised with Russia are non-starters as far as I can see. The only one that was positive was bringing the children back, and we didn't get a commitment to every single one of the children, just bring a bunch of children back. We need to see something that moves the Russian border back closer to where it started from. Maybe not Crimea, but certainly not taking.
Yeah, certainly not that. But I use that only by way of how the West responds.
I think you make an excellent point. I mean, if you remember back to the long train of hundreds of white trucks. What could they possibly want in Crimea? But it didn't look like a military incursion. It looked like a bunch of white trucks, but it was a military incursion.
Yeah.
And we have to get something back on track for the Ukrainian people that they can live with going forward. And,
all right, Mark, is there anything you see there? Do you think last week too, with the corruption issue again raising its head in Ukraine, it does weaken Zelensky's hand?
Yeah, and I mean, so they're already in what I would describe as the underdog scenario here.
Yeah.
That further perpetuates the problem. Russia continues to play a long game here that is not sustainable, but it's really their only play.
Yeah.
So, and this is kind of sadly some of the irony of the situation is that they cannot continue to do this, but their only mechanism to get some concessions, which is what they want, is to drag this out. It's not in their it's in their interest to be seen, to be open and wanting to do this, but that's not really what they're doing. So I am sadly cynical as it relates to where we find ourselves. And this goes back to Tasha's comment and yours about carrots and sticks.
Yeah.
And it's not an absolute. Not to trivialize the situation, but what is the right combination of carrots and sticks that will bring this thing to some sort of mediated, I'm going to say end in quotes, but I don't think it's going to be over. And anybody who believes that this will endure is naive.
No, I mean, Putin is going to keep on going. Yeah.
What we do know is it is not sustainable for either side.
Yeah.
And so that we've got to figure out a way forward.
Just a final word to you, Tasha, on this, because people are even talking about, never mind expanding NATO, but is this even really a body anymore that does things and responds?
Well, I think the Europeans are realizing that they are more on their own than they've ever been, and they've been ramping up defense spending for a number of years. But the fear of Putin, like you said, just keep going. What's next on the menu here, like Lithuania, Poland? I don't know. It's that fear is driving the Europeans to get their act together now. That's like NATO -1, minus the US, right? Or I guess minus Turkey too. But it's a sense that they've got to band together. Multilateralism is increasingly dead, right? It's really regional blocs. It's really bilateral alliances that we are seeing. That the US is cultivating those too, and so is Canada. We do the one-on-one deals, right, on trade, and defense is going to be this sort of like we have a backyard. Let's defend it together. We're not going to depend on people on the other side of the Atlantic. And when you even see, there was a release of phone calls between Witkoff and the Russians, and which seemed to imply that he was trying to get them to speak to Trump in a way that would facilitate the acceptance of the deal, such as it was, which favors Russia. So now a whole bunch of controversy around, what's the real end game here? Whose side is who on, and what do people really want with Ukraine? Why does Trump want to settle it so badly? Is it his peace deal, or is there some other more sinister motive there, if you will, economic interest or other for himself or for Putin? I mean, who knows? We don't know is the point. But
this is, I guess, where we find ourselves in 2025.
Yes. The world is shifting to a very, the post-war consensus, liberal consensus. All that is being wiped off the table, and something else is coming, and we don't fully know the shape of it.
It's always, I think, been a very complicated world out there, but we've been insulated from it because we kind of had that north-south focus, and now we can't turn a blind eye anymore. It's just all there, and we're dealing with it. Great to talk to you guys. Is it too early to say Merry Christmas and Happy New Year? I'm only going to say it's a little early, but what if I don't see you before Christmas? So
never too early.
It's too early. Okay, I won't do it.
No, it's never too early. Never too early, Pamela. Merry Christmas, happy holidays, and Happy New Year.
I have a Christmas decoration.
You're good. You're very good. I see that. None of us do. We're behind.
Just so great to talk to you. Margaret McCuaig-Johnston, an expert on China relations, but a senior fellow at the Institute for Science, Society, and Policy at the University of Ottawa. That's always such a long title, but just writes and talks so intelligently about these issues. Tasha Kheiriddin, journalist, analyst, lawyer, currently a National Post columnist. I think you do some teaching out at Carleton University, trying to shape young minds. You know what? We didn't even talk about the BBC. That'll be a whole other day. And Mark Norman, who was head of the Navy and also Vice Admiral or Vice Chief of the Defense Staff, 40 years serving his country. And you still are, by writing about all these things and participating in this. Thank you all so much for sharing your time and what's in up here. We'll see you again soon. Okay. And thank you all for joining us today for this edition of No Nonsense. We'll talk again soon.